Nick, what topic will we be discussing today?
Nat Turner's Rebellion.
And what do you think were the short-term events that caused this rebellion to happen?
So basically, he formed secret alliances with other slaves because he said he heard the word of God and that he was the chosen one to eliminate the slave owners.
How was he able to form all these alliances in secret?
Well, he was able to do this since he was a preacher, which allowed for Nat to do these things without anyone noticing.
What do you think caused his rebellion in the long term?
It was like a buildup of years of slavery and slave owners thinking that slaves were too weak and obedient to fight back.
So that about wraps up the causes of the rebellion, but what about the effects of the rebellion?
It caused slave owners to think differently of the slaves. They were then aware of the capability of them and that they could and would fight back. This in turn caused the slaves to also rebel more, putting even more of a strain on slave owners to change their ways later on in history.
Now let's move on from cause and effect. Now I want you to look at this cartoon of how Nat Turner's rebellion was perceived by the U.S. Do you think this cartoon is a reliable source?
No,
Why not?
because of bias. The people who made this cartoon were white slave owners, so they would want to make black people and slaves perceived as monsters or savages, and not tell the actual truth.
Which point of view do you think is displayed, and which point of view do you think was left out?
The cartoon is obviously told from the slave owner's perspective, and in turn, it leaves out the slaves' perspectives because, well, that's basically how the propaganda worked.
Alright, so that finishes the cartoon segment. Now it's time for the last part, dominant and counter narrative. What do you think the dominant narrative of this event is?
The dominant narrative is that the slaves rebelled against all the helpless white people, which is only partly true, and were brutal monsters who savagely murdered everyone.
And what do you think the counter narrative is?
The counter narrative is that the slaves rebelled against the white people who had them kept as, well, slaves, which is entirely right, and were mostly justified in their rebellion against the people who held them captive for years.
Do you think this rebellion was justified?
For the most part, since what Nat Turner was doing was for a good reason, but he was also mentally deranged. So for the most part, the rebellion itself was justified, but also, again, only partly, since he was crazy and killed many innocent white people who had little or nothing to do with their enslavement.
Thank you for your time.
You too.